18,000 feet beneath the Pacific Ocean, a warship rests in complete darkness, her massive hull stretched across the seafloor like a monument to a doctrine that changed naval warfare forever. At 855 feet from bow to stern, she is longer than 2.5 football fields. Her island superstructure, positioned unusually on the port side rather than starboard, marks her as unique among all carriers ever built. This is Akagi, the flagship that led the Pearl Harbor strike force, and she lies frozen in a moment that rewrote every rule of naval combat. But here is what makes her wreck so profoundly compelling. Akagi didn't just execute the revolutionary doctrine of massed carrier operations that stunned the world on December 7, 1941. She became the ultimate proof that even perfect tactics, flawlessly executed, cannot overcome fundamental strategic miscalculation. 4 questions have captivated historians since her discovery in October 2019. First, what original design feature, a radical experiment that nearly killed her crew during sea trials, created the structural weakness that sealed her fate at Midway? Second, why did the most technologically advanced search expedition almost abandon the hunt just weeks before finding her? Third, what did her final resting position reveal about the controversial scuttling decision? And fourth, how did her unique portside island become the key to identifying her wreck 77 years later? The answers lie in a conversion born from treaty limitations, a battle that lasted 4 minutes but changed a war, and a search that employed technology beyond imagination. This is how Akagi went from Japan's premier naval aviation symbol to becoming a time capsule teaching lessons from the deepest darkness. October 18, 2019. The research vessel Petrel's autonomous underwater vehicle completes another systematic sonar pass 18,000 feet below the surface, northwest of Midway Atoll. Then something appears that makes the operations team pause. A massive linear structure emerges from the data, far too regular to be geological. As resolution improves, they see what they've been searching for across thousands of square miles. The unmistakable profile of a fleet carrier, sitting upright as if she simply chose this spot to rest forever. But something is immediately different about this wreck, something that will take days of analysis to confirm. This is Akagi, and her discovery represents the culmination of Paul Allen's final maritime archaeology expedition, completed posthumously after the Microsoft co-founder's death in October 2018. The mission was unprecedented. Locate and document the 4 Japanese carriers lost at the Battle of Midway, arguably the most decisive naval engagement in modern history. Akagi was far more than just another carrier. She was the flagship of the 1st Carrier Division, the command platform from which Admiral Nagumo directed the Pearl Harbor attack. She was the floating embodiment of a tactical revolution that proved aircraft carriers were not auxiliary vessels, but the new capital ships capable of projecting devastating power hundreds of miles beyond visual range. But 6 months after Pearl Harbor's triumph, Akagi became a victim of the very doctrine she had perfected, caught in the precise vulnerable moment that Japanese planners had taught the world to exploit. Before we continue, a quick reminder. Subscribing is the easiest way to support the channel. It helps us invest more time in researching these stories, accessing archival materials, and preserving maritime history for everyone who loves the sea. Now let's return to Akagi's story. Akagi's origins begin with politics, not aviation. She was laid down at Kure Naval Arsenal on December 6, 1920, not as a carrier, but as an Akagi-class battlecruiser armed with 10 16-inch guns and capable of 30 knots. Her name, meaning Red Castle, came from a volcano in northern Japan. Then the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 intervened, imposing strict limits on battleship construction to prevent another naval arms race. Japan was forced to choose which hulls to complete and which to scrap or convert. Originally, Japan planned to convert the battlecruiser Amagi while scrapping Akagi. But on September 1, 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck with devastating force, killing over 100,000 people. Among the casualties was Amagi, under conversion at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal when the building dock collapsed, damaging her hull beyond economical repair. Akagi became the replacement conversion. Her battlecruiser heritage gave Akagi extraordinary characteristics. She inherited powerful machinery, capable of driving her massive hull to 31 knots, making her one of the fastest carriers in any navy. Her hull was robust, designed to absorb combat damage, but that heritage also gave her a fatal vulnerability. To save weight and meet treaty limits, designers installed wooden flight deck planking over steel framework. This common weight-saving measure created a catastrophic fire risk that steel-decked American carriers would avoid. Akagi was commissioned on March 25, 1927, with an experimental three-tiered flight deck that proved dangerously impractical. Between 1935 and 1938, she underwent massive reconstruction that transformed her completely. The three-deck nightmare was replaced with a single, elongated deck stretching 260 meters. Her island superstructure was positioned on the port side, opposite standard naval architecture. This unusual placement resulted from her unique funnel arrangement that directed exhaust gases downward and outward. During initial trials, gases were sucked back onto the flight deck, nearly killing deck personnel with carbon monoxide. Extensive modifications were required. The port side island would become Akagi's most distinctive feature, making her instantly recognizable and, 77 years later, making her wreck definitively identifiable. No other major carrier in any navy had this configuration. By 1941, Akagi could carry 66 aircraft, 21 A6M0 fighters, 21 D-3A dive bombers, and 24 B-5N torpedo bombers. She displaced 42 outfits, 150 tons fully loaded, and mounted 6 20-centimeter guns that would never fire in combat. Her crew numbered 2,000 men. She was the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the perfect platform for the new doctrine of massed carrier strikes. The doctrine Akagi would prove was revolutionary. Traditional thinking held that carriers were scouts supporting battleships. Japanese theorists argued carriers themselves should be the primary striking arm. Concentrate all carriers into a single force. Launch overwhelming preemptive strikes. Emphasize speed and surprise. Use carrier aircraft as the main offensive weapon. Pearl Harbor would prove this doctrine correct in the most dramatic way possible. December 7, 1941, at 6:00 a.m., Akagi's flight deck erupts with controlled chaos as the first wave launches from 230 miles north of Oahu. The 6 carriers of the Kido Butai have achieved complete surprise. Admiral Nagumo commands from Akagi's bridge. The strike involves 183 aircraft executing the largest coordinated naval air operation ever attempted. Akagi's aircraft find their targets in Pearl Harbor's confined waters, where American battleships are moored in perfect rows for torpedo attack. The Japanese execute with devastating precision. 8 American battleships are sunk or severely damaged in less than 2 hours. The American Pacific Fleet's battle line is shattered. The doctrine has been proven on the largest stage with overwhelming success. The age of the battleship is over. After Pearl Harbor, the rampage continued. Akagi struck Rabaul in January 1942, supported operations in the Dutch East Indies, and participated in the devastating Darwin raid in February. In March and April, she ranged into the Indian Ocean with 5 carriers, striking Colombo and Trincomalee, sinking HMS Hermes, and driving the British Eastern Fleet into retreat. For 6 months, the Kido Butai operated with apparent invincibility. 0 losses in major units. Every operation succeeded. The doctrine worked perfectly because it caught enemies unprepared. Japanese planners assumed the same approach would deliver victory at Midway. The plan was ambitious. Invade Midway, draw out American carriers, destroy them with overwhelming force. What they didn't know was that American codebreakers had penetrated Japanese communications. Admiral Nimitz knew when, where, and with what forces Japan would strike. American carriers positioned northeast of Midway and waited for the perfect moment. June 4, 1942, at 10:20 a.m., Akagi's flight deck is organized chaos. She's simultaneously launching combat air patrol fighters while preparing for a major strike against newly discovered American carriers. The deck is crowded with aircraft, fuel lines, and ordnance. This is the doctrine's fatal vulnerability, the moment between strikes when a carrier is most exposed, most dangerous, and most vulnerable. Japanese doctrine emphasized hitting enemies in this exact moment. Now Akagi is experiencing it herself. At 10:22 a.m., approximately 17 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise roll into their attacks. They had been searching for hours, nearly out of fuel, when a straggling Japanese destroyer led them straight to the target. Now they're overhead at 14,000 feet, seeing 4 carriers positioned close together, decks packed with aircraft. The perfect target at the perfect moment. The pilots push into near vertical dives, screaming past 300 knots. Japanese combat air patrol fighters are too low, having just chased off torpedo bombers. The carriers are naked. The first 1,000-pound bomb strikes Akagi amidships, penetrating the wooden flight deck near the middle elevator. The explosion is massive, punching through into the hangar deck where aircraft are being armed and fueled. Aviation gasoline ignites, ordnance detonates. The fireball is visible for miles. The second bomb hits moments later, 45 feet aft. Another massive explosion tears through the hangar deck. The wooden flight deck ignites immediately. Within 30 seconds, Akagi is transformed from powerful warship to funeral pyre. The wooden deck burns uncontrollably. Fire spreads faster than damage control can respond, fed by ruptured fuel lines and the deck material itself. Secondary explosions begin as ordnance cooks off. Thick smoke pours from the wounds. The ship's fire mains are ruptured. Portable pumps are brought up, but the fire has too much fuel. The critical flaw is brutally apparent. American carriers used steel flight decks that didn't burn. When bombs hit Yorktown at Midway, the damage was severe but containable. Akagi's wooden deck, that weight-saving compromise made decades earlier, burns like kindling. The fire feeds on itself. For 7 hours, Akagi's crew fights desperately. Damage control parties advance into flames only to be driven back by explosions and heat so intense metal glows red. Men are trapped below decks. Others face impossible choices, jumping overboard rather than burning alive. Captain Taijiro Aoki remains on the bridge coordinating firefighting. Admiral Nagumo transfers his flag to the cruiser Nagara at 10:46 a.m. But Akagi's crew stays, fighting a battle they cannot win. At 4:55 p.m., nearly 7 hours after the attack, Captain Aoki receives the order to abandon ship. Destroyers move alongside. Men slide down ropes, jump into the water. 800 survivors are rescued by screening destroyers. But even after abandonment, Akagi doesn't sink. She floats through the night, burning, a beacon, visible for miles. By dawn on June 5th, Akagi is still afloat, still burning. Admiral Yamamoto faces a painful decision. She cannot be saved or towed, but she might be captured, yielding valuable intelligence. At approximately 5:04 a.m., destroyers approach and fire torpedoes. Accounts vary on how many hit, but at 5:20 a.m., Akagi finally slips beneath the waves, settling onto the seafloor 18,000 feet below. She takes 221 men with her into the darkness. For 77 years, Akagi's exact location remained approximate. Several expeditions attempted to find the Midway carriers, but the depths and vast search areas defeated every attempt. Paul Allen's Petrel represented the state of the art, equipped with autonomous underwater vehicles rated for depths exceeding 6,000 meters, capable of systematic grid searches with side-scan sonar. The search area fell within Papahana-Umukuakia Marine National Monument. Permits were obtained, environmental protocols followed. The expedition operated under strict guidelines. Any wrecks found would be treated as war graves and left completely undisturbed. No artifacts recovered, no salvage attempted, pure historical documentation. On October 18, 2019, an AUV detected an anomaly at 18,000 feet, a massive linear structure, unmistakably a carrier. But which one? The team deployed a remotely operated vehicle for confirmation, descending through 18,000 feet into complete darkness. When the ROV's lights illuminated the hull, they saw a carrier sitting upright, superstructure heavily damaged, but hull remarkably intact. The forensic identification began. Overall length measured approximately 260 meters, matching Akagi's dimensions. The single funnel configuration was visible though damaged. Then the cameras captured the definitive evidence. The island superstructure, though collapsed, was clearly positioned on the port side. Among all carriers lost at Midway, only Akagi had a port-side island. The identification was certain. In October 2019, the Japanese government officially recognized the wreck as a war grave. But the wreck's position revealed something unexpected. Akagi had drifted approximately 20 miles northwest during her death spiral, farther than wartime estimates suggested. This detail reignited debates about whether she could have been saved if towing had been attempted. The evidence adds new dimensions, but leaves the question unanswerable. The debris field pattern told its own story. Sections blown off during explosions had drifted separately, settling hundreds of meters from the main hull. The wreck's upright orientation suggested she rolled during flooding, then righted herself as the heavy battlecruiser hull pulled her upright during descent. Akagi's discovery offers value beyond historical curiosity. Scientifically, she demonstrates deep ocean preservation, where extreme pressure, cold, and darkness slow deterioration. Marine biologists have documented chemosynthetic communities using the wreck as substrate. The hull has become an artificial reef supporting abyssal ecosystems. For historians, the wreck settled debates about damage sequence and structural failure. The hangar deck explosions clearly preceded flight deck collapse, validating some accounts while contradicting others. For 221 families, the discovery provided closure, an exact location after 77 years of approximate coordinates. There is profound symbolism in modern Japan's newest carrier, JS Kaga, commissioned in 2017 and being modified to operate F-35B fighters. The name honors both the original Kaga and Akagi, representing continuity between Japan's maritime past and defensive future. Through virtual access and photogrammetry, global audiences can study the Pearl Harbor flagship without disturbing the war grave. Akagi has become a teaching resource from 18,000 feet down. Akagi rests under protection of both U.S. and Japanese law as a designated war grave. The Sunken Military Craft Act prohibits salvage or disturbance. The 221 men who went down with her deserve more than being remembered as statistics. They were sons, brothers, fathers who served their nation with the information they received. The ethical responsibility to protect their resting place is absolute. The final lesson Akagi teaches from the abyss is perhaps the most important. Technological triumph and tactical genius cannot overcome strategic miscalculation. The same doctrine that delivered 6 months of victories contained the seeds of catastrophic defeat. By concentrating carriers together, Japan created a target-rich environment. By emphasizing preemptive strikes, they became vulnerable during preparation. By assuming enemies would be caught unprepared, they failed to account for code-breaking and determined opponents. Akagi's wooden flight deck, that compromise made to meet treaty restrictions, became the vulnerability that killed her. The doctrine she perfected became the doctrine that destroyed her. The concentration of force that made the Kido Butai devastating meant that when American dive bombers found them, they found all targets in one place. Akagi's hull belongs to the fallen. Her story belongs to history. Her silence speaks louder than any commentary. She remains a guardian on the seafloor, teaching that the most profound lessons come from the deepest places, that the line between triumph and catastrophe is measured in minutes, in materials chosen for a flight deck, in assumptions about enemy capabilities, and in the mathematics of concentrated force meeting perfect timing. 18,000 feet down, Akagi rests in peace. Her silence is her final contribution. Her preservation is our responsibility. Her lessons are our inheritance. And her story reminds us that every strategic choice carries consequences that may not be apparent until the moment they become fatal.